Okay. So MarketHub is a company based in Cork in Ireland, and we've offices in London. We're established since 2014. We're a team of 15 people, and I suppose the premise actually of the business, and actually digital pricing is only one aspect of it. When we started, we actually became the distributor of a company called EMagotag. EMagotag was acquired by a company called SES, and collectively they're the largest manufacturer of digital pricing in the world. And I suppose our premise was a little, our focus in terms of digital pricing was a little different than most people's take on it. The majority of people focus on using pricing displays just to execute on pricing, save labor. Our view is fundamentally different. We think that that's only the very basic thing that you can do, and essentially this is they're a conduit to deliver data. So MarketHub is a data analytics business. It's a software business, and ultimately we became 2 years ago a subsidiary of SES, which is a publicly listed company, and we're based in Cork to develop the Center of Excellence for Data Analytics for SES. So essentially, the whole premise of why and what we believe fundamentally is we believe that, and we are focused on retail, that every single store in retail can be more profitable. And I think now more than ever, and what we're seeing is such a mix in terms of what has happened in the last couple of weeks. We have some stores that have doubled their turnover, and other retailers that their turnover has halved. And I think that the world has fundamentally changed now in terms of how we consume the products we consume, how we in terms of the shift. And it's very hard for retailers to start to predict from week to week, let alone from day to day, how they're going to react to this change. Because, for instance, again, and COVID-19 is an interesting and obviously catastrophic event, but it's also showing us in terms of, from our perspective, how unprepared we are from a technology perspective, from a response perspective, from a data perspective as retailers to cope with this change. And because everything's changing, commodities changing, pricing's changing, stock availability is changing, everything's changing, and the customer as well is they have customers in their stores that they've never had before. And what I suppose what we've found is, as part of this, the reaction from our customers over the last couple of weeks in terms of those who are fully engaged in digital have this ability to be more responsive than those who are not, and that's clear. As a group, we are probably in retail the largest IoT company in the world. We have somewhere in the region of $250 million pricing displays sitting out there at the moment, across 20,000 stores at this stage, all run from cloud instances. So we have a hugely dynamic and hugely responsive infrastructure, and I suppose everything that we're doing in MarketHub is designed to facilitate that infrastructure. So our vision or our mission is to create a store that learns, and we're doing this in terms of using the combination of data from the EPOS system, so from the point of sale, third-party data, whether it's competitive price data or loyalty data, so on and so forth, and also pricing display data or data from as basic things as camera systems, and bringing all these things together in terms of one true view, where we ultimately believe like our view, if you look at retail today and in the last couple of weeks, you haven't seen any promotions in store. Because they're not relevant, because people are mass buying and bulk buying at the moment. So giving someone a promotion to encourage them to even buy more food is not a great idea. And secondly, they're not relevant right now in terms of, availability and the full range, so on and so forth. So your ability to be dynamic. So typically retailers, for most of you that are not in the industry, they change their promotions every 3 weeks. We are of a view that you should give people a deal or an offer at the time that they need it. So, at lunchtime, give them a dinner deal. At dinner time, give them a breakfast deal, and be much more dynamic. And even in terms of the supply chain, how we're actually going to see different, I suppose, channels and different, especially the omni-channel, because we're now all buying online. So that synchronization of the online and offline store, we've had stores that have never delivered from home before, and they've to get their heads around how do they deliver to home from their stores, and that pricing and the synchronization of those pricing, and has basically really, they've struggled with that over the last couple of weeks, but it's incredible in terms of a crisis how quickly they have started to evolve and adapt. And that's one thing that retail is extremely good at doing, is adapting. So our view is now more than ever, this vision of the self-learning store will become a reality as things progress and change. So on to the next slide, please, Angelo. Yeah. As I said, the company, in terms of the scale, I think we're at 20,000 stores, 250 million pricing displays, and 200 store and retailers worldwide. That's probably up to about 300 retailers worldwide. On these islands, customers include Morrison's, Sainsbury's, Dixon's, Musgrave, SuperValu, BWG, Spar, Cost Cutter, Daybreaks, everything, and a whole range of different, I suppose, independent retailers. So then, in terms of, let's see, I can't see the next slide. Yeah, from a visual perspective, it's we take EPOS data, we deliver that via an RF network, proprietary 2.4 gigahertz network to the shelf, and the display itself is an e-ink display, so it's Kindle. After Amazon, we consume the second highest volume of e-paper in the world, and the reason why it's e-paper, it's because visually it's easy on the eye and the angle of viewing. So, and it is like paper, so you can display, I suppose, as paper, and it avoids a loss of glare, and it's a very practical, simple technology in a very complicated network. So that's the combination of, we bring the data plus the display together to deliver that I suppose, self-learning store. The software itself, so retailers traditionally are incredibly proficient at running their supply chain, their logistics, their data, from a top-down perspective, from an ERP perspective, whether it's an SAP or Navision or anything like that. However, and I think they have done an incredible job over the last couple of weeks, and you can just see how incredible the supply chain and the data that they have available to them. However, from a store perspective, they're typically blind. So while we all hear at the moment in terms of, and you hear about, the UK government talking about, we're not getting anything to the front line, it's because they're blind, and from an NHS perspective, centrally you're not clear in terms of what you have in at the hospitals, so on and so forth. In the same way, a lot of retailers aren't clear in terms of what they have on the shelf at any given time, and not having real-time data is sometimes a challenge because of the size and the logistical challenges that they have in terms of their ERP systems. So our approach is from the bottom up. So we take EPOS data, we take that EPOS data, we look at it from a perspective of an individual store, and then we build that back up to what would look like from a bottom up perspective. So why that is relevant, it's because a lot of the time, you know, especially with independent retail, they have products from different suppliers, different wholesalers, they have multiple product codes. It's quite fragmented at that space. However, if you can organize that data in such a way that in such a perspective that we can give you insights into repeat offenders or things that are happening in your store and ranking that in terms of the impact on your business and qualify that, then what we're doing is we're basically making recommendations back to the store or the store manager, the store owner, or the group owner in terms of the most important thing that they can possibly do at any one point in time in that day or in that week, and ranking that in terms of the unit sales and the cash impact in doing it or not doing it. So that makes a massive, and the areas that we focus on then are stuff like whether it's stock, waste, pricing, competitor pricing, time of day purchasing, in-store production. Our whole focus is, and I suppose success to us is if we didn't exist within that retailer's business, that they would have a sense of loss given the data that we can give them and also the ability to execute on that data, please. And I'll give you some examples of this. So here's a retailer in terms of waste. So as it stands, and one of the things that we found about retail in particular is they don't track their waste efficiently. So waste is, you know, everyone claims that they're trying to, you know, save on waste, but if the retailer itself, if they don't even track their own waste, how do you manage what you don't track? Yeah, they're not tracking the waste in terms of in their stores, and they're not, so the reality is their data is a bit flawed in terms of the data that you get back. So one of the first things we do is you go back to basics. We show them retailers in their peer groups that are tracking waste and what that waste number is before they start with us and then after they start with us. So typically 3 to 4% of a store's sales actually end up, that is actually physically waste or overstocking or understocking in terms of from a product perspective. So that 3 or 4% is 100% margin, because waste is 100% I suppose profit lost. Here's an example of a retailer where they basically, we started to firstly help them identify the level of waste that they had, which was 26,000 euros a year. And we made some very basic recommendations on those top 2 or 3 things to do every week. And over the course of, I think it was about 12 weeks, we reduced the waste by about 28% over the course of the year. That was an extra 6 grand in profit. And it also reduced the waste. It doesn't sound like a lot, but 6 grand in profit, a lot of these stores are running at very, very low margins. So that has a massive impact in terms of their business. On another aspect, you see retailers that don't track waste, and then you have other retailers who are looking at their production. So they overproduce or they underproduce. Underproduction is a bigger challenge in terms of sales as overproduction is a challenge in terms of waste. So again, making recommendations in terms of their waste or making recommendations in terms of what they produce. Again, this particular store, we basically put a production plan in place in terms of what is the optimum product to sell at any one point in time. And again, we saw, I suppose, a 4 grand increase in their sales over the course of the year. Again, because everything is, you know, I suppose you can map this thing in terms of data, in terms of the time of the day, or the time of the week of certain things, and the trends are easy to actually track. Another reaction, so this is typically what we see in any given store. In the next slide, on slide 11, where you see typically small incremental changes in their business can ultimately make big changes in their actual bottom line. So, you know, if you save them €5 in terms of margin a day, that €5 can actually be multiplied by 365 times, and that adds up to a lot of money. And if we can make 3 or 4 of those recommendations every single week, so if I can find €5 on one product every single week, and I can identify 10 products that are misbehaving within a store, that adds up to be very, very big numbers in terms of their net profit. In particular then, and that's from a data perspective, and how we actually then work, it's kind of really interesting from a data perspective, how we then execute on that data into, I suppose, a physical aspect or a physical action on the floor. So one of the few things, if we could move to probably the slide 13. The crisis that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, so no retailer right now wants you to sell them anything. They can't, and they can't really cope with the amount of demand that they've had in the last couple of weeks. And we took a decision probably about 3 weeks ago to stop trying to sell to our, I suppose, to new customers. We decided to actually service our existing customers by delivering, I suppose, messaging from our software to their displays in store, linked to what they believe in terms of what the most important thing right now that any one of us can possibly do is obviously pay attention and heed the restrictions in terms of movement, and also behave as human beings in terms of our own social conscience, since whether it's helping your neighbor out in terms of buying them food, or helping your neighbor who is vulnerable and making sure that they don't have to risk leaving their premises. So we've developed a whole range of campaigns and pushed it out to tens of thousands of displays over a course of a couple of days, where we've updated all the products in store with key messaging. And this one in particular on slide, I think over the next couple of slides, you'll see some of the examples of this, where you have social distancing, or respect your neighbor, or the next delivery date, so on and so forth. And it presented a really, I suppose, rewarding aspect of our business. And then you see some interesting things. This is actually an interesting graph. This is at the very start of the crisis in Ireland, or the start of the real ramp in terms of the crisis. So these are weeks in the year. So you see this graph when you have a huge spike. This graph on the blue bar is basically the sale of Absolute vodka in a 500 milliliter bottle. And the sales up to that hadn't been great, and then you had a huge spike. And this spike is that it basically coincided with the lack of hand sanitizer available in retail. So people then rushed out and bought vodka to think that they could make their own homemade hand sanitizer from this. I suppose one of the funny things about this is actually it's 40% proof, and you need 60% alcohol content to develop something that's suitable to kill bacteria or viruses, or at least that's the recommendation. So it wasn't really effective, but it does show as well in terms of what kind of changes in behavior and habits that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. This is another example of how effective or how effective you have in slide 17, the ability, yes, perfect. This is another example of how we actually link our data to I suppose insights, and linking that to campaigns. So this is for in the UK and Ireland, you have a concept called Pancake Tuesday. It's the day before Lent. And what we see typically is when we start to display key messages on a range of products, this year we saw in one particular store on just a range of products, basically a 600% uplift in sales versus the same event in the same period last year. So just shows the combination of using data and display and how it actually, how effective it can be. On the next slide, we have a whole aspect called Captana, where we actually link in with the camera systems. So this is, again, is where we're putting, availing of the security cameras or our own cameras, which we put in store, looking at real-time data in terms of out of stock. And again, that actually can lead back to the supply chain at real time, and start to feed back some data in terms of out of stocks, and making, you know, the store and the group and suppliers aware of how their categories are selling out, and giving real-time data in terms of their ability to see what's physically happening in store. Apart from that, you can look at it in terms of merchandising. But over the last couple of weeks, this is a store that was taken last week in Austria, where we basically, you know, you can see how decimated the shelves are. And again, if you had real-time information back to the suppliers from the store, as opposed to before it even goes back to the store, a lot of the time you could lose about 24 hours, we can vastly improve the supply chain. Beyond that, in terms of third-party data, in the next slide, we show an example of third-party data. And this is where we take a competitor's pricing. So this actually is not a price match strategy from the retailer. This is a store that, this particular store was taken from in a store in Ireland. They've only 1,600 people in a village. And at that particular time, they had probably 200 products in their store that had a lower price than Tesco. And this is a convenience store, independently owned, and they had no reason to be cheaper than a Tesco. However, we're able to highlight that they had a number of products in their store that were competitive to Tesco. We allow them, we then match those products with a template, and then push that out to the store I suppose daily. As a result of that, by just purely telling the customer that you had a product cheaper than the competitor, we got per day a €65 uplift in sales. And now we see this everywhere. This is on 35 products, and a 20% uplift on average is what we see. So I suppose, and again, apologies for the I suppose being let down by some technology, but really our key messaging is the world is fundamentally changed. We think that our need to get closer to data and is important, but the ability to execute on that data is even more important. The impact on that can be quite stark, in terms of, you know, whether it's from a supply chain perspective, from a retailer perspective, or even from a consumer perspective, in terms of displaying public service messaging in store, repeating that. I think, again, we're going to see a lot more, and unfortunately, we're going to see probably a lot of restaurants suffer, a lot of food services businesses go under, and the supermarket will become more relevant again, I think, in this time. And as part of that, it's the combination between an online and an offline world, and then bringing all these things together that we see, and we're seeing that in real time daily across all our stores, across all our regions, and that's it.